All right. So my name is Monica McCoubry. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission. So today, like I mentioned, this is our very last Science Of in the winter series. We will start again in June, but this is our last one. We're going to be talking about garter snakes today. So really just what species we have in Nebraska, their cool adaptations, where do garter snakes get their name, their evolutionary history, kind of just things like that. So just kind of a brief overview about garter snakes, and then talking a little bit about the end. So we'll go ahead. I'll share my screen here with everyone. All right. All right. So just to let everybody know as well, like Amber mentioned, she's going to be going ahead to moderate. So thank you, Amber. If you have questions or if you have comments, please go ahead and put those in the chat. Just letting everybody know, just keep content on questions and comments that you have in the chat just on topic and relatable. Be kind to everyone. Otherwise, we do have that right to remove you. I also want to point out to people that I am by no means an expert in garter snakes or any of the topics that we cover here in Science Of. But I am an expert in science communication. So I am someone that has been doing science communication for quite a while. I do a ton of research for these programs. I absolutely do not know everything. So if you have questions or comments that I'm not sure about, I will absolutely find those answers and then get back to you in an email as well. So again, thanks everyone for joining today. We're going to go ahead and just kind of talk about a brief overview, like I mentioned, like what are garter snakes? Where do they fall in this reptile world or in the snake world? So we're going to go ahead and talk about them today. One of the things we've found is that when we do programs, a lot of people don't really know what to call them. Are they garter snakes? Are they garden snakes? Are they gardener snakes? It's not garden snakes. It's not gardener snakes. They are garter snakes. So when we talk about this, we'll talk about why they're called garter snakes. But one of the things that their genus is known as Thamnophis. So when we talk about garter snakes, that's about 35 species of non-venomous snakes here in North America. So you can find them pretty much throughout the country. There are some certain habitats that they prefer more of, or more likely to find them in certain habitats, but there are throughout the country, throughout North America. So there are slight differences when we look at their scales, but considerable geographic differences as far as their colors. So normally when we see a garter snake, they have a striped pattern. It's usually 1 or 3 longitudinal lines, either red stripes between, which are checkerboard blotches, or sometimes people will even refer to them as grass snakes, which is actually completely different. But you may have heard someone call them that before. But they are garter snakes. When we look at garter snakes, also something that's common throughout them is that they have round pupils. They kind of have the short, narrow snouts. And then they have something called keeled scales. So if you're not sure what keeled means, it just simply means kind of rough scales or rough feeling scales. If you kind of look, you can see in this photo, but if you look at an individual scale, there's a ridge running down the middle of it. So if you look at that, each scale has that kind of bumpy like ridge on it. Other snakes do have this. Some snakes have this, some snakes don't. They're mostly, other snakes just have kind of a smoother scale. Garter snakes are one of those that have what we call keeled scales. All right, so garter snakes, they're usually kind of a small to a moderate size. They're not ginormous snakes. They're not very tiny. And they are usually known for being smelly. So one of the things that most of us, I'm sure, have seen a garter snake, maybe even picked one up, they have that kind of sometimes yucky smelling discharge or the musk that comes from them. They're not usually the best smelling snakes. So they do that sometimes as a defense mechanism. But these snakes are usually less than about 39 inches long, and they're harmless. They're not venomous snakes. They usually see them quite everywhere, but overall they're not they're not harmful to you, your children, your pets, anything like that. Females are also usually larger, significantly larger sometimes than the males, so that's something a little more unique. And then also sometimes garter snakes, like other snakes, are known to strike. So they get defensive if they are backed into a corner, or if they are feeling like they cannot get away. That's just, again, one of their defenses. So When we talk about garter snakes, they're North America's most widely distributed reptile is what's called the common garter snake. We do have those in Nebraska. We'll get to those in a little bit, but they are that Thamnophis sortalis. We see them quite frequently around the town. You see them in your urban backyards. You see them in kind of woody or wet meadows. There's lots of different places that you could find that reptile. But garter snakes overall, they eat mainly earthworms, amphibians, insects, small mammals. Some eat nestling and hatchling birds. And one of the neat things about them, a lot of people don't know, is that they don't lay eggs. They are what we are known as live bearers. So when they have babies, the babies come out as small little miniature versions of the parents or the mom. So they look like tiny little snakes, and then they will grow. Instead of other snakes laying eggs, these guys are what are known as live bearers. All right, so I've been trying to put some videos on all of these. This is not necessarily one that you would find in Nebraska. It was just a video of a garter snake, and I love this video because it does this like cool little head bob thing. But just to see what these animals look like, giving you just a little bit more interaction here on Zoom, since I can't actually show you a real snake, but you can kind of see their round pupils, their small little snouts, and then it goes back in its den. So I'm sure most of us have seen a garter snake before. Most of us have probably seen one that's a little bit more colorful than the one I just showed you in that video, but we're working with what we have. So, all right. So how do you know it's a garter snake when you see one? So they are known for having those contrasting colored lines running lengthwise down their entire body. Most of a good rule of thumb is that they have those lines. Commonly, those lines are creamy colored, they're yellow, orange sometimes, but they can also be dark and some can be bright red. So the 3 lines in the middle of the back, and then there's 1 on each side. Another thing that we see, somebody in here. The position of the line differs with each species. And that's one of the kind of the key identifiers as far as which species of garter snake you're seeing. So it's a really good factor in telling those species apart from each other. All right, so when we talk about where do they get this name garter snake? I kind of went down a rabbit hole and really wanted to know this. So there's a couple different theories, but what I'm finding is that the word garter snake, or the words garter snake, have been pretty common for the last about 200 years. So why are they called garter snakes? When I think of a garter, I think of like a wedding and the garter throw. That's not what they look like. They look like now, but a long time ago, 200 years or so, they were very different looking. So there's 2 theories as to why they're called garter snakes. There's one is that they're named after stocking garters. So this would be the very long socks, and these were something that would keep the socks from falling down. So sortalis is the Latin word for stocking garters, and thus the common name was then derived from the Latin binomial. So a lot of people, when they first found them, snakes resembled garters. So it was something that would keep those socks or those stockings from falling down. So someone named them, this is a theory, someone named them after that. So they kept those stockings from falling down. In early Europe, they had lines and patterns on them, and it could have easily reminded people of the stripes and scales of those snakes. So that is one theory as to why those animals are called garter snakes. The garter snake didn't actually show up in the United States, the word, until about 1775. It showed up in 1773 in a description of specimens in somebody's collection in Lichfield, England. No explanation as of why, but that is what I kind of found when I did a dig here. And then there's a second theory as to why they are called garter snakes. A potentially related hypothesis for this common name is that sortalis means like a garter. So very similar, but Carl Linnaeus, we've talked about him before as being the one that kind of named and kind of started the taxonomic system. We believe, or scientists believe, that he could have used this to combine Latin and Greek roots. And then also Craig Adler was this person who theorized that the word might be a combination of siro, which means Greek for cord or rope, and then talis, which is Latin for the like. So this could mean rope-like. So when someone saw this animal, they named it that sortalis, meaning kind of like a garter or like a rope-like animal. So And we all can't deny that snakes, they look like ropes. So a lot of people sometimes call them like nope ropes, which I do not like that, but a lot of people call them that. So it's interesting to see that how these people kind of got that name, that garter snake name. All right, so taxonomically, how do they fall? First garter snake was described scientifically was the eastern garter snake by zoologist and taxonomist. We just mentioned him, Carl Linnaeus, in about 1758. The genus Thamnophis was described by Leopold Fitzinger in 1843 as the genus for garter snakes and ribbon snakes. So we do have a species of ribbon snake here in Nebraska, very similar looking. They're in the same family, they're same genus, so we will talk about them later today. But there's also several subspecies of garter snakes as well. All right, evolutionary history. So how did they kind of evolve? Where did they come from? There's a couple of theories out there. The one that I found was that their biogeography, their environment, the ecological specialization, impact of diversification on these animals kind of shaped how they came about. So basically it was about their feeding patterns. So they influenced the morphological evolution of these snakes, particularly their head shape. So we talked earlier about how they have this kind of narrow, kind of triangular-ish shaped snout. It's mostly about their feeding pattern. So snakes that have more of a narrow head were able to specialize in something more of like an aquatic prey, while those with a little bit broader heads had more of a terrestrial diet. So that narrow head was allowed them to hunt in creeks, rivers, and lakes a little bit more easily so they could fill a different niche and get those different types of prey. So scientists believe that there was a coevolution. So basically newts, we don't have newts in Nebraska. We have something kind of similar. You might be familiar with our salamanders. Salamanders or newts are very different. But the idea is that there was this garter snake and this newt relationship, this like predator-prey matchup, where garter snakes relied on newts as a source of nourishment, which is something that they would eat. So the species basically involved in this like evolutionary arms race overall. So each player in this evolutionary game theory basically makes changes to its body and biologically makeup in order to survive. So newts have evolved to become more toxic, serving as like a defense against those garter snakes. And so overall, that evolutionary trade-off is then they became a little bit more toxic, so they were able to produce less offspring. And so this newt caused garter snakes to evolve and develop a resistance to this poison. So if you go one level, the predator goes another level. If the predator goes another level, that prey goes another level. So however, just in the case of the newts, there was a biological change and a drawback. So it led to kind of having an evolutionary mixed equilibrium over time. The garter snake's ability to digest that poison resulted in a slowing, kind of a slithering speed, making everyday functions more difficult for that snake. So it required the ability to balance that payoff, so consuming those newts with physical capability. So in the end, both species maintain their balance in those evolutionary stable equilibriums. All right, so where are you going to find garter snakes? They have a very wide distribution. They're very adaptable. They're flexible for their environments. We talked earlier about how they're found so many different places in North America. In Nebraska, you can find them just about anywhere. So they have a very wide distribution. They have varied diets. They're very adaptable. One thing that is pretty common is they have a proximity to water. So this could be a temporary body of water. This could be a permanent. This could be a creek, a marsh, river, wetland area, but overall they are present throughout North America. It has been found, and I found a few papers that showed the western portion of the United States, North America, I guess. The garter snakes are a little bit more aquatic than the eastern portion. So I found that in a couple of papers, but there's forests, woodlands, fields, grasslands, even in your suburban lawns, they're never really that far away from water. They're often adjacent, like I mentioned, to a wetland, a stream, or a pond. This also, we have to think about how this influences their diet. So looking at these animals and the type of habitat that they're living in, what are something that can be found in all of these wetlands and streams and rivers and creeks? Amphibians are a huge part of that diet as well. So amphibians are a large part in garter snakes' diet. So thinking about them being adaptable and flexible to their environment, they are able then to be in this habitat and still survive and sometimes even thrive in these areas. All right, so sometimes people have mentioned there was a lot of speculation. Are they venomous? They're technically not, they're non-venomous species. For many years, scientists believed that they were non-venomous, which they are. Like other snakes, they have kind of a slight toxicity in their saliva, but it's not like a rattlesnake or anything like that. Some people do react differently to it, but it, again, is just the makeup and that biological makeup of the person. I remember one time I was in a lab and I had gotten bit by a hognose. Nothing, didn't have anything, didn't have any problems. Someone the next day got bit by the same snake. And I remember the following day when they came, their hand was a little swollen. It was red. It wasn't anything to worry about or go to the hospital about, but people just react differently to different things. Again, it's all in that person's biological makeup. So when we talk about this, they're not able to deliver this saliva very efficiently. However, it is very weak and it's not dangerous to humans. However, if you are a small insect or you're a small amphibian or something like that, it could have a very different effect on those animals. So sometimes people have been reporting things like mild swelling, bruising, some pain, some puffiness in their hand or wherever they've gotten bit. Again, it all just depends on that biological makeup of that person. We are all very different from each other. So this gland is very different from those in things like vipers or lapids. It's going to be very different in like a garter snake. So here, this gland that they have produces basically a mild toxic secretion, but again, it is not a threat to people. So something that always gets asked when we do education programs or when we talk about snakes, can they bite? Yes, anything with a mouth could bite you. So a snake could bite you, I could bite you, my daughter could bite you. Like, I mean, anything with a mouth could overall bite. So snakes, yes, are capable of biting. So when we talk about this, they only usually bite if they are on the defense, if they are injured, if they're afraid, if they see that they do not have a way out of a situation, then yes, they could result in biting. One thing that also makes more sense then is it kind of makes more sense to flee than to attack, and that is what most snakes will do. The bite can be deadly, like I mentioned, to small prey animals, but they do have one of the mildest bites of any snake species. All right, so again, this is a very quick overview because we only have about 45 minutes or so. So I do want to talk a little bit about, that was kind of just like an overall view of like garter snakes and the idea of this genus, but overall talking now about a little bit about their behavior, their communications, their mating, their reproduction, that kind of thing. So all right, so when we talk about communication, people usually think of animals like orcas and chimps and people and prairie dogs, how they communicate with each other. So snakes, they also communicate, but it's going to be very different. So garter snakes are one of those that actually communicate through pheromones, which is that scent or that smell type of communication. So they have a very complex pheromonal communication system. They find each other, males and females will find each other, and their pheromone scented trails. It's a way for them, like I mentioned, to communicate with each other. So they use their vomeronasal organ to communicate through pheromones. So every time they flick their tongue in and out, they're gathering those chemical cues in the environment. And then over time, they will go, in a very quick time, they will go up to their brain and their brain will say what they're smelling, or I don't know what that smell is, or the smell is really strong to my left. So it gives them a lot of information to sense their environment. These animals then, most of those pheromones, like I mentioned, are produced by glands that are released immediately into the environment. So upon entering what's called the lumen, the chemical molecules will come in contact with those sensory cells, which are then attached to the neurosensory epithelium of the vomeronasal organ. So they're smelling, they're flicking their tongue, they're bringing those chemical cues into their mouth, and it's going up and sensing, their brain is sensing what they are smelling. All right, so one of the things that they have done is those sex pheromones. So I'm sure a lot of us have heard about these mating balls or when they mate with each other. David Cruz is an associate professor of biology and psychology at Harvard. He said that female garter snakes will actually hyperventilate during courtship. So this was a paper that I found. Basically, the female will stretch her scales apart and she will release this pheromone, which will attract those male garter snakes. That is how they find each other. Usually the females will come out of their hibernaculum or their hibernation dens later than males. Males are usually come out first. Females will come out later. And then usually some of the males will kind of just wait around for those females to come out. And the females have to let the males know that they are out. So they release this sex pheromone. So it's a very unique form of communication. Most pheromones, like I mentioned, they're produced by those glands. They're released immediately into the environment where they influence the behavior of other members of those species. That is the idea of communication. So hormones, like I talked about, they convey information from tissue to tissue within an individual organism. Cruz also mentioned that the substance that he looked at in garter snakes is transported like a hormone, but eventually reaches the exterior and functions like a pheromone. So it's a very, very unique form of that communication, and they use it a ton for mating purposes. All right, so again, I'm sure a lot of us have heard about this mating ball. We've heard a lot of things about it. Males will usually, like I mentioned, emerge from hibernation earlier than females. Once females emerge, males often swarm them, beginning the mating season. So like I mentioned, males are basically just waiting for the time where they can reproduce and mate with a female. Females barely wake up and come out of hibernation, and the males are there waiting for them. There's often sometimes dozens to hundreds of males that will fight for the ability to mate with a single female. Basically, they are solely focused on mating and courting. That is what they are there to do. Once they finish that, then they will go about their other daily lives. They form what is known as a mating ball. So this is usually a lot of males to a single female. So in that photo, there's probably a female in there somewhere. But as a result, males will mate, or females will mate with multiple males, and this during breeding season, and this can result in multiple paternity. So when she eventually will have babies, basically those babies will have different fathers in the same exact clutch. Usually around 40, depending on the species, but around 40 live young are then born in the late summer. All right. However, there's not always a simple they meet and they mate. There's always competition, and the competition is often very rough to find a female. So there's a lot of males that aren't as big or aren't as strong or aren't as capable of getting in and finding a female very quickly. So there are sneaker males. So basically, these sneaker males produce a trick to get to a female and get all the other males away from her for even a second to go in and mate with her. So what they will do, these sneaker males, they will go off a little ways and they produce a pheromone that is very similar smelling to a female. Other males in the area will smell this. They will slither over to that sneaker male. And then once that sneaker male tricks these other males, he will slither back in and try to mate with the female. So over time, they've just adapted this ability that they know that they are not the strongest, they're not the largest snake. This ability to secrete the scent, this pheromone scent that's very similar. Basically, he goes back in and uses or mates with the unattended females. All right. However, there's also been ability to do away with this trickery. So upon emerging, females will usually move away from the den. Small females especially want to do this because there's so many males that come to court her and come to her. She could be crushed in that situation, so she wants to make sure she gets out of there. Females can also store the sperm from multiple males. And the research suggests that she also possibly has a mechanism for choosing the healthiest ejaculate. So she wants to make sure that her offspring have the best possible genes. And research says that she may be able to have that mechanism where she can choose the healthiest male that has mated with her. Basically, this allows time for the males to compete against each other for the chance to copulate. Whether the females were just either using this to their advantage, or sometimes they're just attempting to avoid the males altogether. Examples, sometimes there's this harassment of females trying to get to mate. Like I mentioned, competition's very rough, and over time they want to make sure that they get to mate. Sometimes there's this harassment, including these giant males that overpower the females, or there's something called an anoxic kiss is what I found. And basically it's puffs of deoxygenated air, so air that has had the oxygen basically taken out of it. It can be derived by males, and it's known to basically put the female into this oxygen-deprived intoxication state, and sometimes it could even result in death as well. So one study looked at whether this was reluctance basically was some type of sexual selection, but I couldn't find a ton of information on it, but that's something that I did find. All right, so mating is also very costly. So when we think about this, the males, they're not normally doing mating season. This is something that they have to focus on right away. So they don't really focus on those other things. They're not getting that nourishment. They're not doing normal snake things that they should be doing. They're solely focused on that mating, and that can be costly for males and even females. So since a male can copulate many times, it is to their reproductive advantage to stick around the den for as long as possible, kind of just waiting for those unmated females. However, the more time that he spends waiting at the den, the less time he is spending feeding. Thus, only the largest males and those that kind of accumulate the most resources from the previous year can afford to wait for those extra copulations. Otherwise, if you're a skinny male, you are already not eating, you're waiting for these females, you're taking an extra expenditure of energy to mate with her, you're taking a great risk because you're not eating, you are vulnerable to predation, there's lots of other things, you're getting tired, you're just not treating your body correctly, I guess. So that's something that, only the largest males sometimes do get to mate with those females. During that time, females must expend a huge amount of energy. They're exposing themselves. They have a greater level of predation because of that induced pregnancy. So it would be advantageous for females to grow their younger quickly and return to the feeding sooner. So it has been shown that the larger females give birth quicker, basically furthering this casual loop where then they are allowed to spend more time feeding after that. All right, so speaking of feeding, what do garter snakes eat? So like all snakes, they are known as being carnivorous, so eating strictly meat or other types of prey items. So they're not going to be seen eating plants or fruits or vegetables. Snakes are going to be known as carnivores, so they're eating other types of animals. So this could be really anything that they can swallow and that they can overpower. So things like earthworms, frogs, toads, salamanders, a lot of the times they're slithering on the ground. So if there are nestling ground nesting hatchling birds, sow bugs, crayfish, insects, spiders, really anything that they can eat. And like other snake species, they do not chew or cut their food. They will swallow it whole. So again, that sometimes snakes have that your eyes are bigger than your stomach kind of view where they will try to eat something and then realize it's too big for them, and they will spit it out and go find something else. So they do eat a lot of food, but they are also prey for lots of other animals. So if disturbed, garter snakes, like we talked about earlier, they can absolutely bite. Anything with a mouth could bite. But they could coil and strike. It is one of their ways that they make sure that they can protect themselves. And also, they will discharge that kind of gross smelling, musky, scented secretion from a gland near their cloaca. It's known as musk. And then also it smells and it tastes extremely bad. I've never tasted it, but I'm sure other animals have. I do know that it smells. So predators will drop the snake, hopefully, and then find a different meal. It contains about 7 highly odoriferous volatile compounds in there. And when biologists broke it down, so that is, again, why the smell and the taste is horrendous. How many of you guys, just by, I guess I can't show of hands here, but you can put it in the chat. How many of you guys have ever picked up a garter snake before and you've had that kind of milky looking secretion on your hands, or any snake in general, and it just smells really bad. Someone raised their hand. Thank you. Yes. So it happens. It's very, very common picking up snakes. Garter snakes are just kind of one of those that are known to smell really bad.
Hey, Monica.
Yeah.
I just want to pause really quick because there are two questions. And
Okay.
also, yes, I have experienced the musky smell of a garter snake. And although scientifically I thought it was interesting, it was not pleasant to
Yeah.
experience. Really quick, so going back a little bit, Raina had asked, how does hyperventilating release the pheromones? And
So,
then, yeah,
oh
go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. And the one more question was, what is a cloaca? Which
All
is a
right.
fun
So
conversation.
yeah, it is a fun conversation. Yeah. So that hyperventilating basically is they're breathing up and down, they're moving their scales, and then from what the paper said, they're moving their scales and releasing that compound. So basically they're breathing really fast and they're moving their scales and stretching those scales and releasing that compound. David Cruz mentioned how it acts like a hormone, but it's released like a pheromone. And then someone asked, what's a cloaca? It's kind of that common butter opening, common opening that snakes will have. This is where they poop. This is where they mate. So it's kind of that common area where all of those where that animal will release its waste content. It will mate from that same hole. If it's a female, she will release her eggs from that area. So someone asked it's their butt. Basically, yes, it is. When you ask a lot of people, especially kids during programs, one of the things I always ask is, where do snakes poop? A lot of people have said like the end of the tail, out their mouth. I don't know where that rumor started, but definitely not. So their cloaca is almost like a flap. It's right before their tip of their tail, depending on the species, but it's a little flap. It opens up, and that's where their poop comes out of. That's where they mate. It's the idea is that it's one opening. So yes, technically, I guess it is their butt. When we talk about that, I never thought I'd say butt on a science of, but here we are. Okay. Then really quick, I do want to talk about, this is Science of in Nebraska. So I do want to mention which species we have here in Nebraska. So Nebraska is home to 4 species of garter snakes. This is not a photo from a garter snake here. It's just a photo of garter snakes. I will show you ones that we do have here in a second. But we have the terrestrial garter snake, we have a western ribbon snake, the plains garter snake, and then the common garter snake. These snakes are going to have, again, very similar to other snakes in the country, contrasting colored lines that run lengthways down their entire body, and then also one down the middle of the back, and then one on each side. To identify garter snakes, like I mentioned earlier, it needs to observe which scale rows those lateral lines are on. So that is one of the ways that scientists use to identify snake species and kind of figure out between some of them. So what does that mean? Here is a photo of what I'm talking about here. So when I mentioned later here, in some of our Nebraska species, which scale rows that you're looking at, and like the lateral stripes are in which scale rows, this kind of hopefully gives you an idea of what I'm talking about. So looking on these scale rows, the 1, 2, and 3, that's what we're talking about and where those lines are. All right, so one of the first ones that we're talking about today are terrestrial garter snakes. So these are probably the rarest in Nebraska. They are the rarest in Nebraska. The species range barely enters western Nebraska, but they are in the Pine Ridge area of Sioux and Dawes County. They're most often this kind of browny, grayish, bluish color, and it almost looks like they have a zigzagged pattern on them. They also have those rough feeling keeled scales. They're about 20 to 30 inches in length, and they are found in the ponderosa pine forests of western Nebraska. They eat fish, amphibians, larvae, earthworms, slugs, lizards, again, anything they can overpower and anything that they can swallow. If you're in that area of the state and you're lucky enough to find a terrestrial garter snake, their lateral stripes are only restricted to scale rows 2 and 3. So looking back at that, if you find one in that area and you're not sure which one it is, scale rows are 2 and 3. So if you ever go up and go out to herp or look for reptiles and amphibians, that's why it's always a good thing to bring a field guide, because then you know what you are seeing. These guys, they will mate in March, late March to late April. They give birth then around July or August. And just because of where they are in that kind of western part of Nebraska, their active season tends to end a little sooner than ours in the eastern part of the state. But again, it all depends on the weather. So September usually ends their active season. All right, so this one, even though it doesn't have the name garter in the name, it is still one of our 4 species of garter snakes. So this one's a little different and has some interesting things about it, but this is the western ribbon snake. It is the only garter snake to lack vertical bars on the lip scales around its mouth. So kind of notice that in the following photos that I'm going to show you here. But they do have those keeled scales. They are normally black to a dark brown in color. They have a mid-dorsal stripe that runs down the back. It's a little narrower than other species, and it's usually orange. And the belly on this animal is going to be white with no markings. This species is semi-aquatic, so spending part of its time on land, part of its time on water. Its preferred habitat is wet meadows, and then meadows on the edges of ponds and lakes. Their main prey consists of amphibians, fish, small lizards sometimes. And these guys also in the winter, they will even use crayfish or small mammal burrows for hibernation. And then they're not uncommon to see on warm days in February basking. So like yesterday here on the eastern side of Nebraska, it was 60 degrees. It is not totally uncommon to see one of these guys out basking in the sun in February even. So, and they are also only known in those southeastern counties. And so considering our state wildlife action plan, our Nebraska Natural Legacy Project, they are considered a species in need of conservation. All right, so then we have the plains garter snake. These guys are considerably variable in their color. So sometimes the next two, it's really hard to tell you what an average snake looks like because they are so variable depending on where you find them. But ground color in western Nebraska is going to be kind of typically a greenish color. On the eastern side of the state, the ground color is more red, and especially around that central Omaha area. So again, geographically, their color is different depending on where they're found. The plains garter snake also has 2 alternating rows of black spots that border the stripe. This gives them kind of their signature checkerboard look. The lateral stripes on them are scale rows 3 and 4, and then the belly remains white and unmarked. The plains garter snake is also, if you're not knowing what you're looking for, you can all get them confused. So looking at the plains garter snake versus the western river snake in appearance, the black vertical bars on their scales on their lip from the mouth to the chin. If we remember earlier, that ribbon snake, I'll go back here really quick. They do not have those little bars by the lip. These guys do. This species is found statewide, wet, moderately wet prairies, and wetland associations. They emerge from hibernation a little later than other species and usually begins their active season in April. And then females will give birth in kind of mid to late August. When we talk about them, they eat things like ground nesting birds, slugs, fish, amphibians, small mammals, very similar to other ones. All right, and then our very last one is the common garter snake. So sometimes people refer to them as the red-sided garter snake, but again, varied in color and pattern across the range in which you find these guys. So sometimes it is hard to distinguish between a common garter snake and a plains garter snake. I always have trouble with garter snakes for some reason. So mostly these guys are found in grassland or woodland areas. They have permanent or semi-permanent bodies of water. They eat fish, amphibians, earthworm, snails. Like other garter snakes, multiple males will court and breed with that single female. These guys are also found statewide. These are also one of the garter snakes that are known to be active every single month during the year, which again depends on the weather. But if you have extremely warm days in February or January or March or December, it is not unusual to see the photos of these guys out basking. So again, that's one of the reasons we talked about garter snakes in February. These guys, again, 40 live young, about July or August, multiple paternity, very similar to the other garter snakes we've talked about today. These guys emerge about March or so, again, depending on the weather. But these are very, very variable. And again, these are the most common reptile that you're going to find in North America, the common garter snake. All right, and I do want to mention one thing. I know people love garter snakes, obviously, because you're here on this webinar, but I also know that people are always not thrilled to have them in and around your homes. even if they are beneficial to the ecosystem, and even if you love garter snakes, I understand that people don't necessarily want them in their homes or around their homes. So how are some ways that you can not have them around your homes and still enjoy them? So garter snakes, like other animals, they're attracted to warm objects. So basically getting rid of these areas where they can harbor that heat for growth and digestion and reproduction. Where are some areas that you can kind of get rid of those if you do not want them in your homes? Or by your homes. Retaining walls are great areas for snakes. Retaining walls look very nice, and they have a very good efficiency of keeping soil up and retaining that the area of your house or your lawn. They look really nice, but they do offer areas for large amounts of garter snakes. Our neighbors right across the street from us, and I don't know why they have them and we don't, but they have a huge retaining wall, and every single year, about April or so, they have tons of garter snakes that come out. So it's not unusual to have those animals with those structures. So the reason that they're in the retaining walls is because there's lots of little areas for them to get into, those spaces between the bricks and the concrete. So if you would like to, those are areas where you can fill in with cement structures that are more solid instead of the little holes that they can get in. If you are also interested, you can use rock or wood that fit tightly together, basically to decrease areas where snakes can find refuge. You can trim your plants, your trees, your shrubs. You can eliminate branches close to the ground. If you really want to eliminate them, eliminate their habitats. Also remembering that they can squeeze into the size of a 1/4-inch hole, so not very small or not very large. They can squeeze into those areas, but also remembering that they're completely harmless to you, your children, and your pets. And also, one of the things I want to disclaimer is that if you take away plants and shrubs and trees and eliminate all those branches, that's a lot of habitat for insects too. So it's like if you want to not have these animals, you get rid of this. But if you don't want to have this, but you want to have these, so there's a lot of things, there's disadvantages and advantages. So just understanding why these animals are there, what they're looking for. And remember, once they find that food source, they're most likely to move on. So all right, I think that's it. All right, so that was it. That was about 45 minutes, so good timing on my part. This was our last Science Of for the winter series. We will again start in June. We're going to be talking about armadillos, tiger beetles, milkweed, sandhills, slime molds, ticks, all of people's favorite things. And like I mentioned earlier, if you really like this and you're like, I really would love to see a Science Of birds or science of fungi, we have that. So I just looked the other day, and this will be 75 videos once I get this one uploaded, but that's 75 educational Science Of videos that you can go watch and learn from. So if you have a topic that you really want covered, when I send that evaluation for everybody, make sure that you fill that out and let us know what topics you'd like to see. Or you might want to check out our YouTube channel to see if that's already done. So there's a lot of educational videos on there that you can see. If you're interested, also check out our Facebook and our Instagram, and then also our Nebraska Wildlife Education website as well. All right.
There's a few comments and questions real quick.
Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen here.
Yeah, so Ashley just mentioned that they had found a molted snake skin in their driveway recently, so they're excited to learn more about garter snakes, thinking maybe that was one of them, which is cool.
Yeah, you don't hear that very often, so that's cool.
Yeah, and Tana had said she has found baby garter snakes every once in a while, which is so excellent. Raina asked, do snakes produce saliva?
They do. So this really helps them aid in that digestion process. And basically it's like a lubricant to swallow those food sources that they eat, or those food prey items that they are eating. Just like people, and we use it for digestion and to also swallow, snakes are very similar in that way as well.
Good question on that one. And then Anne had asked, is there a Science Of on bats?
There is. We did one a couple years ago. There is one on bats. Foxes in neighborhoods. I don't have one specifically on foxes in neighborhoods, but I did one on canids. So we mentioned foxes in there, where you can find some information in there. And if you are looking, we just did a Pure Nebraska 10/11 TV segment about foxes and the calls, and that is something that you can also check out on like our Facebook and our Instagram as well. So that would be just a resource for you too. So if you're looking for specifically foxes in neighborhoods.
That's pure Nebraska.
It's pure Nebraska. Yes.
Okay.
All right. And so just so
Excellent.
everyone know, everyone that registered today, I will make sure to send you an email with some links and resources and the link to this video once it's up on YouTube. So be sure to look for that. And then otherwise, we will see you hopefully June 6th. So thanks everyone for joining us. I appreciate you guys that are here every week. So thank you. And thanks everyone for joining us today. So hopefully we will see you in June. Thank you, Amber, too. Thanks.